Hi, Dr. Galvin, or classmates who might be watching this video. I am Ernesto Mandujano. My partners are Ricardo Esperanza and Jose Abrina. And for this project, we decided to cover linear periodization. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, who developed or popularized linear periodization? So linear periodization is also known as traditional periodization because it was the first form of periodization that was created, and it was developed by Dr. Leo Matveyev and his colleagues during the 1950s and 60s in the Soviet Union. Matveyev developed the idea of periodization based on Hanzi's model known as general adaptation syndrome, or GAS. General adaptation syndrome is a model that describes three responses to stress, which are alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. In addition, general adaptation syndrome suggests that progressive overload should have some form of periodization for optimal adaptations to occur. Um, to confirm their ideas, Matveyev and Tudor Pompa, a Romanian sports scientist, they analyzed the results of Soviet athletes from their performances in the 1952 and 1956 Olympics. Within their analysis, Matveyev and Pompa compared the successful athletes to the unsuccessful athletes in terms of their training schedules and training programs. And what they realized was that they could perform much better on a periodized training program. So before the 1960 Olympics, both Matveyev and Pompa constructed training programs for the Soviet athletes. And after the periodization of their training programs proved to be successful, Matveyev and Pompa's concepts were popularized throughout the Eastern Bloc, Romania, and Western Germany, as well as other parts of Europe. What is the primary goal? Well, the purpose of linear periodization and other forms of periodization for that matter is to divide an athlete's program into macrocycles, mesocycles, blocks, or microcycles so that the athlete can better balance stress and recovery. In addition, utilizing linear periodization allows for organized variation of COFA verb, which, as you all might remember, is choice, order, frequency, intensity, volume, rest, and progression. This means that there's a decrease in chance of overtraining or overuse injuries, and it also allows the athlete to or individual to peak at the right time, especially before competition or season. Moreover, linear periodization allows for progressive overload to be applied more effectively. This means that throughout the macro progression, there can be a gradual alteration of stress, an increase or decrease of intensity or volume, and an increase in complexity. And lastly, it allows the athlete to go from more general to specific. This means that as the periodization cycle progresses, muscle actions, range of motion, speed of movement, muscle groups, energy systems, intensity, and volume, they all get more specific to the athlete's sport. So on the right, I put an image here, and it shows a macrocycle, so a year-long plan, and it shows that as the season progresses, it goes from more general to specific. Next slide. How to perform linear periodization. Sorry. So generally speaking, the cycle begins with high volume and low intensity. And the idea is that as the athlete approaches their season or competition, they can allocate their training volume to their sport. And during the off season, most of the volume will be performed in the weight room. With that being said, there's a gradual decrease of volume and a gradual increase of intensity over the course of a periodization cycle. However, there can be an increase in both volume and intensity if it is appropriate for the athlete's training goals. For example, if you have an athlete or client who's new to training, they might be able to progress in both volume and intensity over time. But generally speaking, there's going to be a decrease of volume and an increase of intensity over time. Um, in addition, volume decreases near athlete's peak for optimal performance, and within a macro cycle, the athlete will generally peak 1 to 2 times. So on the right here, I put an image of a graph that shows the relationship between volume and intensity. And as you can see, there's an inverse relationship. So during general physical preparation, the volume is typically high and intensity is low. And this can be your muscular endurance or conditioning. And during special physical preparation, this is typically where your hypertrophy or strength phase will occur. So the volume and intensity might be meet somewhere around the middle. And during competition, training for power or developing sports sport specific skills will typically be the focus. So intensity is going to be higher and volume is going to be lower. All that really matters is that um, volume and intensity they um, they increase or decrease in a linear fashion. So yeah. And so to summarize linear periodization, a program cycle should be periodized in a way that demonstrates a gradual increase or decrease in volume and intensity.
So the major benefits of linear periodization is how it's easy to create and also to follow this type of training program. And that's because only one variable is changed at a time, since training volume and intensity are inversely related, as how Ernesto explained earlier. And another benefit is how it's actually the most simple form of periodization, because the other forms of periodization could get pretty complex. Another benefit is how it helps teach your client to become more aware of the importance of slowly increasing the resistance weight gradually over time. This is especially important for clients that are new to fitness, so they could build a strong foundation. And people who are new to fitness don't always know that it's important to constantly challenge their body by working towards a peaking point. Another benefit is how it increases strength and performance when compared to non periodized training programs. And that's because linear periodization constantly challenges the body with progressive overload throughout the training program. And the last benefit we have is how it's better for training to a specific peak of strength and power. And this is especially good for athletes, so that once it's time to once so athletes perform their best once it's time to compete. So a study that supports the effectiveness of linear periodization is one conducted by Dr. Gustavo Algretti Gao and his colleagues from Brazil. In this study, 9 elite Brazilian male athletes were chosen to go through a 4-month strength training program that consisted of 4 microcycles. The subjects all had to train 3 times per week in all mesocycles, and linear periodization was applied with a decrease in training volume and progressive increase in intensity during these mesocycles. uh, data was collected on 5 assessments of their 1 RM in squat, bench press, and deadlift. The initial assessment was done before the start of the periodized training. The second assessment was done at the end of the first 4-week mesocycle and the beginning of the second mesocycle. The third assessment was done at the end of the second 4-week mesocycle and the beginning of the third mesocycle. The fourth assessment was done at the end of the third mesocycle and the beginning of the fourth mesocycle. And lastly, the final assessment was done at the end of the fourth 4-week mesocycle. And the results of this study was pretty much that a linear periodization training program is a relevant method of increasing muscular strength and performance in athletes. So here's a table that was provided in this study that showed the mean and standard deviation of the neuromuscular profile for the participating athletes. And as you can see from the results of each assessment, the mean results of each athlete improved every time that they were tested in all assessment times. And although there are many studies that show the effectiveness of linear periodization, more studies have to be done that involves a different combination of periodization models to, to further prove the effectiveness of periodization.
Some of the major criticisms, concerns of linear periodization. So one of them is linear periodization is not meant for multi-sport athletes who compete in different seasons in a single year. So it is mostly for athletes who train on specific major athletic event per year. So one example would be like athletes who train all year for a world championship series, or Olympic athletes who train for 4 years for an upcoming Olympic Games. Instead of say a high school student participating in many sports in one whole year. And another concern is fatigue. So there's potential increase of fatigue caused by increased training intensities for extended periods of time. So saying by each cycle you're increasing volume, of course your muscles are going to get tired. So that's another concern when you focus on pretty much on the same exercise and muscles every week. Another one is jumping ahead. So say as you progress weekly or by cycle, making huge jumps like increasing volume per exercise is pretty much not a smart idea because say you think you can add 10 more pounds and pretty much isn't it pretty much bring you to failure. So the best thing is to jump slowly. It might take longer, but you'll get the results. Another one is maintenance. So another potential concern is maintenance of specific parameters is difficult once an athlete transitions to another phase. For example, an athlete may have a 6 week strength phase, but once they transition to the power phase, there may be a decline in strength since the loading and repetition schemes for the power phase are not well aligned with strength development. So pretty much you try to maintain that strength week by week, but it's hard because you get tired and like I said, it's fatigue, and pretty much that's a concern for most athletes keeping that going. Okay, so some examples for linear periodization. So right here, I have a graph. Pretty much it shows we have weeks on the x-axis and volume on the y-axis. So pretty much when you begin when the program with periodization, linear periodization, you start out with a high volume and low intensity. But as you go week by week or by cycle, um, the volume decreases, but you increase intensity. Mm. So another example of linear periodization is, here's one. Um, so the basic idea of periodization is to start with high volume and low intensity. And as time goes by, you gradually want to increase your volume with high intensity. So say, example, once your competition draws near, you're doing very low volume and very heavy weights. So here's an example that I found. It's a 6 month time span. So with you start off with week 1 through week 4. You start off with 4 sets of high volume with low intensity, and then as you go by week 5 to 8, you keep the sets the same, but the volume lower but intensity higher, and it goes on pretty much. So for week 9 to 12, you decrease volume, increase intensity, Week 13 goes as well. Decrease volume, increase intensity. And then once you hit the last week, you're pretty much doing 3 sets with high high weight, the lower volume and high intensity. So with linear periodization, you are always adding weight to the bar or exercise. Every week is heavier than the previous week, unless you miss, say, the weight or a designated deload week. And it's pretty much these are this is an example of linear periodization. And this is our references. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you.